Many names that pass through the sport of boxing get forgotten with time. The sport's roots are deep, and those who fought long before modern times had to weather more challenging conditions to reach the top. Even so, the top didn't always mean the pinnacle of success. If you've followed the sport's history, you've begun to understand that not all wins and losses are created equal. Records can be deceiving, as is the case with one Dominick McCaffrey. Hailing from the true fighting town of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a city that would go on to produce boxing superstar champions such as the former world middleweight champion, the Pittsburgh Windmill Harry Greb, former world light heavyweight champion, the Pittsburgh Kid Billy Conn, and one of the greatest to never get a shot at the world title in the supremely skilled Charlie Burley. Dominick McCaffrey helped put Pittsburgh on the map decades prior. Welcome to 86 Boxing, where we dive into the rich history of boxing and shed light on the fighters from the past who helped lay the foundation of what we see today. Stay dialed in as we share true boxing history, real stories, real life. Dominick McCaffrey came from a family of natural boxers. Now, not in the sense of them competing, but they were the type that could hold their own with anyone in any kind of a role. McCaffrey's father was a grocer on Penn Street in Pittsburgh, and when he was young, McCaffrey on Saturdays and vacation days would sit on the high stool at the rear of the store and keep an eye out on anything amiss. Pittsburgh was a manufacturing city, and physicality and culture were staples of the city during the period, and one could argue still is. As fate would have it, so to speak, there was sort of an arrogant ironworker and wrestler by the name of Charles McCoy who would always pass by the grocery store. He was the type of individual who wore his shirt open enough to show the brawn of his chest, and when he walked down the sidewalk, he took up about 2/3 of the sidewalk as he walked with a swaggering confidence, almost daring anyone to brush him wrong. McCaffrey's brother came to despise the arrogance of McCoy, and one day let it be known to him directly that he had a brother, Dominick specifically, who would put McCoy to sleep without the aid of an opiate. And with that, Dominick McCaffrey made his first foray into the pro ranks on February 6, 1881, in Howland Springs, Ohio, taking on the debuting Charles McCoy, picking up a stoppage victory after McCoy's corner threw in the sponge after the end of the 6th round at only 17 years of age. What's noteworthy is that the purse for the contest was $500, which has the same buying power of over $15,000 in 2024, a pretty hefty sum for a debuting fighter, or more of a testimony to McCaffrey's management. It was intended to be a one-off affair, but given his success and against the wishes of his parents, McCaffrey right then and there decided that prize fighting would become his passionate pursuit. Next was a Philadelphia matchup with the hard-punching Irish native Mike Cleary on September 1st. Cleary came into the contest 6-0, with all of his wins coming via knockout. As a matter of fact, all but one of Cleary's career victories would end in knockout. The two men would fight to a 4-round draw. A fun fact is that Cleary would go on to spar with future world heavyweight champion James J. Corbett on August 28, 1885, while Corbett was still an amateur. From here, McCaffrey would move into a series of fights against one of the pioneering lightweight boxers, instructors, and managers within the sport, in Toronto, Canada-born Harry Gilmore. Harry Gilmore was noted for a nearly 2-hour contest with then world lightweight champion Jack McCauley on January 14, 1887, in a losing effort. Gilmore would go on to instruct such boxers as Jim Barry, Harry Forbes, and Billy Stiff. Gilmore would also manage Chicago-born lightweight great Packy McFarland during his career, speaking to the extent of his impact on the sport both in and outside of the ring. Gilmore learned much of his trade from studying the legendary Jim Mace after Mace had competed in a series of exhibitions in Chicago during the 1880s. In reference to Mace, Gilmore was quoted in December of 1910 stating, It was agreed by every boxer of prominence in those days that Jim Mace was the greatest fighter of all time. He was clever and could punch, but his cleverness was not so much in fancy movements with his arms as in his remarkable ability to duck and footwork. Mace was the originator of tricks, many of which are used by the boxers of today. Dominick McCaffrey would be knocked out in 3 rounds by Gilmore on December 1st in Toronto, Canada, before the two rematched in what was a no contest on May 1st, 1883. Just prior to the no contest with Gilmore, McCaffrey had fought and lost a 4-round points decision to Esdras Gus Lambert on April 15, 1883. Lambert is a Quebec native who fought such men as Morris Grant, the second ever colored world heavyweight champion, the Black Prince Peter Jackson, the second longest reigning colored world heavyweight champion, and world heavyweight title claimant Peter Marr. On September 19th, McCaffrey would knock out former heavyweight champion of Colorado, John P. Chow, in 4 rounds, a fighter who shared the ring with the likes of former world bare knuckle champion Jake Kilrain and English middleweight title challenger Jack Burke. The fight went down in Denver, Colorado. In October of 1883, a clipping from the Wheeling Register out of West Virginia ironically noted that McCaffrey was gaining a reputation in Colorado for being a scientific and hard-hitting boxer. McCaffrey would fight to a 4-round draw with Cummin Mike Cleary and Charlie Mitchell opponent William the Prussian Sheriff on April 25, 1884. On May 9, 1884, it was reported that McCaffrey had been matched with Jake Kilrain for a 4-rounder in Pittsburgh or Boston, with the winner receiving 60% of the receipts. Despite the report, the fight did not take place. Now, on June 30th, between 5,000 to 6,000 fans showed up to the Madison Square Garden in New York to witness what was to be a glove contest between then American heavyweight champion, the Boston Strong Boy John L. Sullivan, and British middleweight and heavyweight great Charlie Mitchell. Sullivan and Mitchell were no strangers to each other. Their most famous fight was in 1883 when the two men fought 3+ hours to a 39-round draw under London prize ring rules in the pelting rain in France. Regarding the MSG fight, there were concerns days prior in relation to Sullivan's drunkenness and Mitchell's overcoming a bout with malaria, which precluded it wouldn't be much of a contest. Around 10 minutes before 10 o'clock p.m., it was reported that Sullivan staggered on stage along with McCaffrey's manager, Billy O'Brien, and Dr. W.H. Vanderpool, with O'Brien letting the crowd know that the doctor had advised that Sullivan was too ill to compete in the scheduled contest with Mitchell, and that rather than to have people disappointed, Dominick McCaffrey would step in to spar with Mitchell. This, of course, sent the crowd into an uproar, with O'Brien essentially being booed off the stage. Being held up by the ropes and looking to be in terrible, almost unrecognizable condition, Sullivan then moved to the edge of the ring and stated, "I can't spar tonight. I'm too sick. You may think I'm drunk, but I ain't. I'm sick. I don't think it fair to give you a friendly set to with Mr. Mitchell, for you didn't come to see that." This left the crowd hissing in disdain. Charlie Mitchell then hopped on stage near the ring stating, "I'm in no condition to spar myself. I have had it very bad with malaria, and I don't think it would be fair to Mr. Sullivan to have this match, as I am feeling pretty good tonight, and I came here to do the best I could. That is all there is in it." This left the crowd crying in shame as they hissed and made derogatory remarks towards Sullivan. The crowd then slowly and sadly left the building. The crowd had paid an estimated $14,000, the expenses of which were $2,000, and Sullivan and Mitchell's camp split the remaining $12,000. $14,000 had the same buying power of around $450,000 in 2024. Days later, on July 3rd, it was reported that in reference to the prospect of taking on Dominick McCaffrey, Charlie Mitchell stated, "I do not think McCaffrey has done enough in the pugilistic world to make it worth my while to meet him." In response to such, McCaffrey stated that he had never fought a draw with anybody, having defeated 9 men, and his honors were clearly as those of Mitchell. He also stated that he had defeated men in the western states whom Mitchell could not beat. He finished by saying he was willing to meet Charlie Mitchell on July 4th, 1884, and that he would give Mitchell his entire proceeds if Mitchell would test him in 4 3-minute rounds. Unable to get Jake Kilrain or Charlie Mitchell into the ring, McCaffrey would continue to fight whoever was willing to step in the ring, racking up 2 wins in July, along with challenging any man in the world barring John L. Sullivan. McCaffrey was even in attendance at the July 28th contest between Mike Cleary and Jack Burke, announcing prior to the fight that he'd be willing to take on the winners in a sparring match for all receipts in the house. On August 13th, 1884, an opportunity came in the form of an exhibition, as John L. Sullivan would host a series of exhibitions in Boston, and Dominick McCaffrey would be one of the contestants. Sullivan faced McCaffrey first. The two sparred what was considered to be 3 scientific and interesting rounds. The larger Sullivan mainly used his left hand, but would occasionally rush in, and after delivering a number of half-arm-length blows, let up on McCaffrey as to not hit him with his full power. McCaffrey looked to be the more scientific boxer between the two, and even busted Sullivan's nose, which drew blood. Sullivan would also spar Steve Taylor and the councilman Tom Denny, as the event was for a benefit to Denny's campaign. In the aftermath, reporters caught up with pioneering boxer Professor Mike Donovan, who had the following to say of Sullivan. He can settle any man in the world, sure, and the bigger the man against him, the better it is for him. Let me give you a pointer. I was with him in Hot Springs when they picked a terrible big fellow for him to knock out. I felt of this fellow at the hotel, and I tell you, he was something immense. He had the broadest shoulders of any man I ever saw, was hard as iron, and weighed around 240 pounds. I told John of the kind of fellow he had to meet. Is he a big fellow, says John. You bet, says I. He's a stunner. Then the bigger he is, the harder he falls, said John. Well, he knocked that big fellow out in just 2 punches. He hit him there under the chin, then he cross-countered him and he went down. When he came to, the fellow was silly. When he was traveling, he used gloves with about an ounce of hair in each of them. In Memphis, he knocked the big fellow out in 11 seconds. The fellow was out, didn't come to for 20 minutes. Well, the man laid there and Sullivan rubbed him and slapped his hands, but he couldn't bring him around. You could hear people in the audience saying, he's killed him. And it's my opinion they would have killed Sullivan if the man had died. Finally, the fellow came to and Sullivan lifted him up, but he staggered like a drunken man. I tell you that Sullivan thinks no more of knocking a man out than I do of eating an apple. On August 18th, it was reported that a contest scheduled for August 25th between McCaffrey and Pete McCoy in Boston, Massachusetts, had been abandoned due to an inability to gain a license. Also on the 18th, McCaffrey was challenged by manager and catch wrestler Duncan C. Ross to take on wrestler-turned-boxer Mervyn Thompson, offering $1,000. Ross also deposited $500 in forfeiture money with the National Police Gazette owner Richard Kyle Fox. Evidently, a license was granted, and on August 25th, 1884, Dominick McCaffrey would face off against Pete McCoy as scheduled in Boston. McCoy is a fighter who would ultimately face such fighters as Jake Kilrain, George LeBlanc, and Jack Dempsey. On this night, McCoy's second was none other than John L. Sullivan. After filling out each other in the first round, the second saw the two men resort to wrestling tactics, though McCoy proved to be the stronger of the two as he threw McCaffrey around the ring to the point grunts could be heard. In the third, McCoy dropped McCaffrey twice as supporters of McCaffrey, likely pissed from the wrestling tactics prior, jumped on stage where the ring was located. This, of course, led to McCoy's supporters doing the same thing. From there, a melee ensued. In the midst of such, it was reported that John L. Sullivan knocked down around a half a dozen individuals himself before police rushed in to stop the contest. The fight was ultimately declared a draw. It was speculated that McCoy had been acting on the advice of John L. Sullivan, who desired to see McCaffrey beaten. Prior to the benefit and sparring session, Sullivan and McCaffrey were friends, but things changed in the aftermath as Sullivan didn't like the fact that McCaffrey was able to stop him on some of his rushes. On August 26, McCaffrey, alleging grossly unfair treatment in the previous fight, issued a challenge to Pete McCoy for a 5 to 6 round contest with small gloves for $1,000 or $5,000 and gate receipts, with the winner taking all, and the fight to be decided within 6 weeks in New York City, where fair play would be assured. Additionally, McCaffrey noted that if McCoy declined, he'd be willing to fight John L. Sullivan at any time or place with any amount of stakes Sullivan desired. On September 14th, Dominick McCaffrey again issued a challenge to Jake Kilrain to face him under Marcus of Queensberry rules for 4 to 6 rounds, or a fight to the finish between $250 to $1,000 a side, with the winner taking all receipts, and the fight to take place in either Pittsburgh or New York. McCaffrey additionally deposited a $100 guarantee with the Pittsburgh Times. This would be a moot point, as on September 23rd, it was reported that articles had been signed for McCaffrey to meet Charlie Mitchell on October 13th, $500 a side, with the winner taking 65% of the door money. The fight was to take place in New York. This time, the fight went down as planned, as on October 13th, 1884, Dominick McCaffrey met Charlie Mitchell in a 4-round contest at the Madison Square Garden. Mitchell came into the contest with a record of 21 victories, 1 loss, and 5 draws, with his lone loss coming at the hands of John L. Sullivan in 1883. Like McCaffrey, the Birmingham native started at lower weights, primarily operating at middleweight, and fought larger men at heavyweight despite being outweighed in most of his contests. What essentially solidified the contest happening was a meeting between Mitchell and George C. Brotherton of Philadelphia around 3 weeks prior to the matchup, where Brotherton guaranteed Mitchell a purse of $1,200, for which Mitchell accepted against the will of his management as they sought another contest with John L. Sullivan. Mitchell provided $500 in forfeit money to secure the deal. Dominick McCaffrey came into the contest around 164 pounds, while Charlie Mitchell came in around 158 pounds. Each fighter was in fit and trim condition. Between 5,000 and 6,000 excited patrons were in attendance to witness the contest. The betting odds leaned slightly in favor of Charlie Mitchell. At ringside, John McCormick of the Cincinnati Enquirer was chosen as referee. McCaffrey was seconded by Billy Edwards, while Mitchell was seconded by Billy Madden. The two men circled each other to start the first round before McCaffrey tapped Mitchell on the cheek as he sprang back with a smile. From there, Mitchell lunged forward, looking to land a deadly left, but missed. Mitchell then landed a glancing blow on the nose before the two men clinched. Mitchell continued to lunge forward, looking to land his left, but was unsuccessful as McCaffrey continued to smile. Nearing the end of the round, Mitchell again lunged and was caught with a check right hook that sent the crowd into cheers just before time was called to end the round. Mitchell rushed McCaffrey again to start the second, forcing the two men into another clinch. McCaffrey caught Mitchell with another check right as Mitchell lunged to land on McCaffrey's body. This angered Mitchell, and he charged in, and the two began to exchange blows on the inside, with Mitchell getting the better of the work. McCaffrey tried to lead and was caught with a stunning blow to the neck. This forced McCaffrey back as Mitchell charged, nearly sending McCaffrey out of the ring were it not for the post. This forced McCaffrey to clinch. After the break, Mitchell caught McCaffrey again with the shot to the ear-nose before time was called. McCaffrey looked to be tired as he went back to his corner, while Mitchell looked as strong as an ox. The third round opened tactfully, though Mitchell started to force the fighting. Mitchell again forced McCaffrey to the ropes before the two fighters had been broken up. Mitchell then lunged, looking to land a left to McCaffrey's body, and again caught a check right to the ear, sending the crowd into cheers. Mitchell tried another 2 times and started to get peppered with shots from McCaffrey. McCaffrey caught Mitchell with the hard shot to the jaw as Mitchell tried to rush in a 3rd time. Mitchell continued to force the fighting, but was again caught on the jaw as he forced McCaffrey to the ropes just as time was called. In the 4th and final round, both men met in the middle of the ring, though Mitchell looked to be exhausted. McCaffrey took the offensive. Both men had their mouths open, and there were 2 fierce rallies that sent the crowd into an uproar. During the second rally, McCaffrey caught Mitchell with a hard shot on the cheek that cut Mitchell as blood flew. McCaffrey then started to tee off with punishing headshots that left his own chest bloody. The crowd was so loud they drowned out the referee's commands. The referee, who was working from ringside, was forced inside of the ring to break the two men apart. The two men finished with heavy punches being thrown, though McCaffrey got the better of the work as time was called. The police captain had to step in to separate the two men as they refused to obey the command on time. Mitchell looked groggy on his legs as the two men were separated. From here, referee McCormick declared Dominick McCaffrey the victor of the contest as his team celebrated. On October 25th, it was reported that Dominick McCaffrey had turned down a return bout challenge from Charlie Mitchell to fight in New York in either hard gloves or bare knuckle. The reason behind McCaffrey turning the fight down was that he had his sights set on John L. Sullivan. In November, McCaffrey challenged Sullivan to a contest with $5,000 at stake, even submitting $500 in forfeit. Having now silenced Charlie Mitchell, McCaffrey was regarded by many as the next best man to Sullivan. In the meantime, McCaffrey would stay busy participating in exhibitions. On January 17, 1885, John L. Sullivan was interviewed by the New York Sun while in New York in anticipation for a matchup with Patty Ryan and stated, "I've been training in Hawthorne 6 miles from Boston. I've been working hard, too, and I feel all right. I see the newspapers have been at me again. There's no truth in those stories. I tipped the scales at just 213 pounds in my clothes and will not reduce myself. I think I shall want all the flesh I have. I have been attending principally to my stomach and wind. I shall do the best I can on Monday night, and I will show the public that I am all right. I will make a match to meet Dominick McCaffrey since he is so anxious to stand in front of me, and then I will give this kind of business up." From here, it was just a matter of time. On March 18th, McCaffrey and Sullivan, along with their backers, met to negotiate for a matchup. McCaffrey aimed to fight on March 30th, but Sullivan stated he would need more time to train. Given such, the two teams agreed to meet on April 2nd, 1885. Leading up to the contest, Sullivan was reported to be several pounds overweight. During this same period, Richard Kyle Fox of the National Police Gazette was backing Patty Ryan in a contest against Sullivan under the Marquess of Queensberry rules in Butte, Montana. Fox deposited $2,500 and the diamond belt on March 29th to secure the deal, with Fox additionally confirming he would cover all of Ryan's expenses. On April 2nd, which had been staged for the McCaffrey-Sullivan contest, arrest warrants for both McCaffrey and Sullivan were issued by Judge Newland Fells of Philadelphia for conspiring to breach the peace. The two men met with Judge Fells in court, with them being issued $5,000 bonds each. It took over 2 hours for bondsmen to be found in order to secure their release from court. At this point, the fight was called off as a large crowd had gathered outside of Industrial Hall, with the patrons holding tickets seeking their money back. Eventually, the crowd left. As for McCaffrey and Sullivan, they sought a new location for the contest. Fast forward to August 13th, 1885, and reports out of Cincinnati, Ohio stated that Sullivan and McCaffrey would meet at Chester Park in Cincinnati for a 6-rounder under the Marquess of Queensberry rules on August 31st. As fate would have it, on August 29th, 1885, Dominick McCaffrey would find himself standing in front of his most formidable opponent, and then American, and by some standards, world heavyweight champion, the Boston Strongboy John L. Sullivan. Hey there, boxing enthusiasts. If you've enjoyed today's deep dive into boxing history, don't forget to subscribe to 86 Boxing for more fascinating stories and legendary matchups. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update, and give us a thumbs up if you learned something new. Your support means the world to us. It takes a lot of time and resources to research and bring these historic profiles to life. Leave a comment below with your thoughts, and let's keep the conversation going. Thanks for watching, and keep punching above your weight class. Scheduled for 6, McCaffrey weighed in at 168 pounds, while Sullivan tipped the scales at 208, a 40-pound weight advantage. The general consensus leading into the fight was that Sullivan would win, but McCaffrey would give him much trouble. Around 5,000 spectators were in attendance. The fight took place under open air in the center of a track. The master of ceremonies was William Muldoon, famous Greco-Roman wrestler and eventual Sullivan trainer. A referee was chosen on the spot, William Tate of Toledo, Ohio, and the fight commenced. McCaffrey made the first lead but was easily stopped by Sullivan as the two operated cautiously to start. Both men landed a couple of glancing blows before McCaffrey ducked a heavy blow before wildly swinging. Sullivan pressed him to the ropes where McCaffrey fell to his knees. The two clinched as the round closed. In a second, Sullivan led to start but was unable to land on McCaffrey. McCaffrey charged forward, but his punches were dodged by Sullivan. McCaffrey then gave Sullivan a tap on the back of the neck that sent the crowd into a chorus cheer. McCaffrey repeated the same shortly thereafter and brought about even more cheers. Sullivan again was able to press McCaffrey to the corner, though he was able to slip away as time was called. Sullivan pressed McCaffrey even more in the third as he forced him to the ropes while pressing him down across the ropes. Someone from the audience then called time, but the referee instructed the fighters to continue, for which Sullivan then drove McCaffrey to his own corner, landing a shot that made McCaffrey fall, almost slipping off of the platform for which the ring was constructed. The two men then delivered a set of short-range blows, though not with much force as time expired. Sullivan opened the fourth with a blow to McCaffrey's jaw as McCaffrey started to look a bit weary while Sullivan remained fresh. McCaffrey continuously started to clinch Sullivan. Despite such, Sullivan managed to land a shot that brought about blood from McCaffrey's nose. The round closed with McCaffrey then falling, though it wasn't scored a knockdown. In the fifth, neither man was aggressive, though upon McCaffrey landing a glancing blow, Sullivan attacked but was unable to catch McCaffrey, who ran. Upon trying to muster his own attack, McCaffrey's punches were again ducked by Sullivan. After a more cautious boxing, time was called. In the sixth, it was reported that Sullivan seemed desperate and looked to be winded, while McCaffrey was now the fresher fighter. Sullivan landed some solid shots on the inside as the two men separated. Sullivan used his power to push McCaffrey around, and whenever the two were near the ropes, Sullivan clinched as both men hit the deck in a fall. Upon rising, Sullivan again closed in on McCaffrey, but McCaffrey avoided it and delivered a blow that was returned back by Sullivan, though McCaffrey ducked and escaped as time was called for the sixth. The crowd seemed to have swelled to around 7,000, this time with the crowd shouting, many in favor of McCaffrey, who they supposed had won the matchup. McCaffrey had stood up against Sullivan through 6 rounds and seemed able and willing to go on to a finish. McCaffrey was overwhelmed with congratulations, while Sullivan was left to be cared for by his stage attendants only. As the crowd understood the terms, it was a draw and thus a virtual victory for McCaffrey. As time went on and with the majority of the crowd dispersed, William Muldoon made an announcement that the referee had decided to give the bout to Sullivan on the ground that Sullivan had made the greater number of points. The announcement was wholly inaudible at the press seats, and various versions of the press reported that Sullivan had won because of a foul, a description that still lingers on today. It was generally supposed that Sullivan was to knock out McCaffrey within 6 rounds or less in order to win, and McCaffrey himself stated after the match was over that he thought this was the case. McCaffrey even insisted on the two fighting to the finish, but Sullivan had already left the ring. Prior to the match, it was mentioned that the two men had agreed to a match that would be conducted for scientific purposes, but Sullivan would not agree. The referee noted that he didn't have any agreement for anything other than the contest being a 6-round world championship matchup. The entire matter was muddled with no two persons understanding the terms of the agreement either way. Upon being asked his opinion of McCaffrey, Sullivan stated that he did not care to say much about him and that he was a pretty clever fellow, but if the fight had been under London prize ring rules, he would have knocked McCaffrey out in the 2nd round. Sullivan then stated he was done with fighting, having whipped every man they brought in front of him. For McCaffrey, this showing was a thing of legend, and the true fight fans understood that despite the odds, he'd left the mark. McCaffrey wouldn't fight for the remainder of 1885 as he took advantage of his stardom, cashing in on appearances and sparring sessions. As a matter of fact, McCaffrey would only fight once in the latter part of 1886 in a November contest against Sparrow Golden, who was a Philly fighter from a fighting family who showed promise early on in his fight career, but was ultimately dispatched of by Dominick McCaffrey in 11. McCaffrey was also challenged by John L. Sullivan again, but Team McCaffrey didn't take the offer seriously as they viewed Sullivan's challenge as a cry for sympathy, given the controversial ending to the last matchup between the two. McCaffrey also received bad press for not fighting and routinely turning down matchups. McCaffrey's activity would continue to wane in 1887, though he did technically fight twice. After a no contest in less than 2 rounds due to police intervention on March 7th, on March 9th, McCaffrey would take on and defeat the Brooklyn strongboy Jack Fallon. Fallon fought the likes of the Irish giant Peter Marr and Black Prince Peter Jackson in his career. Stepping back to the beginning of 1887, on January 23rd, it was reported that suggestions had come about and it seemed likely that Dominick McCaffrey would at some point be matched with Nonpareil Jack Dempsey after the two had met in Philadelphia days prior. In February, it was reported that McCaffrey versus Dempsey was as good as made, though several months passed, and finally, on December 27th, 1887, articles were signed for McCaffrey and Dempsey to meet somewhere near New York City for $2,000. The expected date for the contest was January 31st, 1888. On this same day, the Pelican Club of London, England, sent word to Richard K. Fox that they were backing English middleweight Charlie Toff Wall against Jack Dempsey for the middleweight championship of the world and the Police Gazette Diamond Belt. Dempsey traveled to Connecticut to meet with Fox, but word was that Fox would agree to back Dempsey for as much money as Wall could get were the matchup to be made. On January 15th, reporting from New York noted the fighters were well into training and that the fighters around the area favored McCaffrey to get the better of Jack Dempsey. Thoughts and predictions aside, on January 31st, 1888, Dominick McCaffrey would step in the ring with one of the greatest boxers to ever lace up the gloves and the first world middleweight champion in boxing history, Nonpareil Jack Dempsey. The fight went down in Jersey City, New Jersey, scheduled for 10 rounds. There was some dissatisfaction with the selection of Jer Dunn as the referee, as some considered him a friend of Dempsey's. McCaffrey weighed in at 168 pounds, while Dempsey weighed 158. The men wore 3-ounce gloves. There were around 3,500 spectators in attendance, including around 100 police officers, though there was no interference. The first blood in the contest came in the very first round when McCaffrey was able to draw blood on Dempsey's forehead. Dempsey was aggressive through the first part of the contest, looking to end things early. In the second, Dempsey landed a big shot to McCaffrey's right eye, the most significant punch in the fight thus far. Through the third and fourth rounds, Dempsey operated largely on the defensive, but was again able to land shots on McCaffrey's right eye and caught him with a hook to the temple in the fourth that left a bruise. Dempsey continued to control things through the fifth and sixth rounds. And in the seventh, Dempsey started to take full control as he landed a number of shots on the body and shoulders of McCaffrey. In the final 3 rounds, it was practically all Dempsey as far as significant punches landed. In the end, the referee awarded the bout to Nonpareil Jack Dempsey, who still looked fresh after the contest. McCaffrey himself didn't take considerable damage, but the verdict was clear, with no fuss or turmoil regarding who the winner was. McCaffrey, though, was reported to have been a sore loser. This would lead to another period of inactivity for McCaffrey. In May of 1888, it was reported that McCaffrey and English bare-knuckle great Jim Smith were in discussion for a contest with it expected to happen no earlier than July of 88, with them wearing the smallest gloves allowed by law. The fight didn't materialize. On October 28th, it was reported that McCaffrey was being matched with Tom Lees, former Australian heavyweight champion, but that fight too did not materialize. On January 18th, 1899, it was reported that Jack Fallon and Dominick McCaffrey had signed articles for a contest to take place in short order. Additionally, McCaffrey sent word to the California Athletic Club asking them to fund a $5,000 challenge to Nonpareil Jack Dempsey for a fight to the finish in their return bout. Upon seeing the dispatch, Dempsey immediately accepted, stating, "Certainly I will meet McCaffrey at the place named if the offer is accepted by the club. Of course, every fight there is to a finish. I want no percentage business, and if I lose, I want nothing. If I win, I want the entire purse. I will fight McCaffrey at catch weight, and that will be a great advantage to him. One thing I will say, I will be in better condition when I meet McCaffrey again than I was when I defeated him previously. I have tried my best to secure a match with Mitchell and failed, and I hope that McCaffrey means business." A month later, on February 19th, reporting came out that Jack Dempsey, who felt that McCaffrey wasn't too anxious to meet him as one may think, offered another proposition to McCaffrey that they could meet for $2,500 a side. Dempsey stated he would need only 4 weeks to train and would have his representatives ready to accept the offer on 24 hours' notice. Dempsey also wanted the arrangements for the contest to be made between mutual friends of his and McCaffrey. Efforts would ultimately fall flat, as on March 12th it was reported that McCaffrey had purchased the Criterion Saloon in New York, and in doing so would be giving up the prize fighting game for good, as he chose to focus on the saloon, also stating that there were no longer any chances for money and fame in the boxing ring. McCaffrey maintained a presence in the headlines and attending some of the big pugilistic affairs throughout 1889. Much like any great pugilist, McCaffrey's supposed retirement would be short-lived. On November 8th, McCaffrey sent a dispatch stating that he would be willing to face Canadian Marine Georges Lablanche under suitable terms. Lablanche became the first man to defeat Nonpareil Jack Dempsey on August 27, 1889, by using what was dubbed the pivot punch, or Lablanche punch, which was a spinning back fist that was eventually banned from the sport. Specifically regarding facing Lablanche, McCaffrey stated, "The return from my business is more satisfactory than that from the prize ring. Still, if a sufficient inducement were offered, I would not hesitate to meet the Marine. I have bested Mitchell, held my own with Sullivan, chased Dempsey around the stage for 10 rounds, and I think it would not be an injudicious thing to arrange a go between myself and Lablanche. However, it all depends upon the inducement offered." On November 12th, it was reported that McCaffrey had sold his New York saloon in order to make arrangements for one more big fight against John L. Sullivan in San Francisco, as rumors had persisted that the two would again sign articles. McCaffrey stated that he didn't sell the saloon because of money, but because the business didn't suit him. He also let it be known that he was willing to face Jake Kilrain and Joe McCauley in addition to Sullivan. This was also around the same period where John L. Sullivan was being hotly pursued by Black Prince Peter Jackson. On November 17th, Sullivan sent word that he would be willing to pulverize McCaffrey for no less than $10,000, which was viewed as an absurd amount. $10,000 would eventually turn to $20,000, and the fight would not materialize. While McCaffrey couldn't lure Sullivan back into the ring, by March of 1890, there were rumblings of him facing another prominent heavyweight from the period, and gentleman Jim Corbett. Surely enough, on April 14th, 1890, Dominick McCaffrey would step into the ring with one of the premier technical boxers the sport has seen, and former world heavyweight champion, gentleman James J. Corbett. The fight would go down at the Fifth Avenue Casino in Brooklyn, New York, and was scheduled for 4 rounds. McCaffrey wore flesh-colored tights, while Corbett sported blue knee breeches and a light-colored, close-fitting sleeveless shirt. McCaffrey's condition was apparent the moment he stood up, as a murmur of disapproval from the crowd was heard. Corbett looked to be in supreme condition. The referee for the contest was Steve O'Donnell. Professor Mike Donovan, who was Corbett's second, was the timekeeper. At the call of time to start the bout, Corbett arose smiling and shook hands with McCaffrey. McCaffrey led with the left and landed a hard right to the face and body that wiped the smile off Corbett's face. The two exchanged blows from there, and McCaffrey started to refuse to break cleanly. The round ended with McCaffrey huffing for air as Corbett smiled once again, returning to his corner. In the second, Corbett pounded McCaffrey's stomach and face. McCaffrey found himself routinely coming up short trying to reach Corbett, who was able to counter heavily. A blow to the nose drew blood from McCaffrey. The round ended with Corbett forcing McCaffrey about the ring. The third saw McCaffrey continue to weaken as he saved himself several times by clinching. Corbett punished McCaffrey to the body inside of his head. McCaffrey was able to duck a shot or two and landed hard, but was almost immediately countered. By the end of the round, McCaffrey looked to be all but out of the fight. In the fourth and final round, McCaffrey, nose bloody, came out gamely, but the writing was on the wall as he started to immediately clinch. Both men started to fight hard, with McCaffrey's punches being weaker as Corbett was landing the harder blows. After about 2 minutes of fighting, McCaffrey swung with a hard right, which missed, and Corbett landed a huge shot to the body that sent McCaffrey flailing over the ropes with his hands down. Corbett did not hit him again, and McCaffrey yelled something about meeting in the center of the ring before time was called. Corbett had won, and his friends went wild in delight. McCaffrey had the better shade of it, but Corbett no doubt got the best of him due to Corbett's power, delivery, and judgment. Prior to the fight, McCaffrey noted that there wasn't a bit of spite between him and Corbett. He noted that Corbett was 4 inches taller and 30 pounds heavier, and the fact that he only had 1 week to train for the contest. Corbett gained more fame from the contest would eventually lead him to being the man to face and dethrone John L. Sullivan. Seemingly motivated by the encounter, McCaffrey would fight an additional 4 times in 1890, winning each contest. McCaffrey would gain a win in his only fight of 1891 before not fighting at all in 1892. McCaffrey would again fight once in 1893 before not fighting at all in 1894. There were discussions of a return bout between McCaffrey and Corbett, but nothing ever materialized. During this period, McCaffrey was the lead instructor at the Manhattan Boxing Club. McCaffrey also moved back to Pittsburgh for a period to start a boxing academy, though it didn't have much success. McCaffrey also did some officiating. Of course, in many situations where there are dramatic changes, some handle it better than others. On December 27, 1894, McCaffrey was fined $3 for intoxication after being found laying on the park stoop covered in snow. By this point, McCaffrey was no longer an instructor at the Manhattan Club and seemingly in a bad place. He was arrested for a period as he was unable to pay the fine. In February of 1895, McCaffrey was hospitalized for blood poisoning but made an eventual recovery. On June 15, 1895, Dominick McCaffrey would spar with the Irish giant Peter Marr over 3 rounds in Long Island, New York. After almost losing a foot due to an infection in September, on December 16th, McCaffrey let it be known in New York that he had no intentions of ever re-entering the ring. In February of 1897, McCaffrey was interviewed and predicted that Bob Fitzsimmons would defeat Jim Corbett in their March 17, 1897 World Heavyweight Championship matchup, the first of such ever filmed. For the most part, McCaffrey stayed largely out of the spotlight for the next decade. Through these years, there were always articles looking back on the old days reflecting on McCaffrey's matchup with John L. Sullivan back in 1885, largely giving nods to McCaffrey as having bested Sullivan. In 1905, John L. Sullivan would even pen an article reflecting on attempts at a rematch with McCaffrey that never happened for a number of reasons. For McCaffrey, he would fail in comeback fights in 1906 and 1908, though he was largely a shell of the fighter he once was. After John L. Sullivan's death in 1909, Jim Corbett penned an article on Sullivan stating that being there at the Sullivan versus McCaffrey fight, the points victory was indeed awarded to Sullivan immediately after the contest and that rumors of an extra round were false. Either way, it was clear that Dominick McCaffrey and John L. Sullivan were forever connected. Dominick McCaffrey finished his career with a record of 15 victories, 6 losses, and 2 draws. 8 of his victories were via knockout. He also had 2 no decisions and 5 no contests. McCaffrey died at the age of 63 on December 29, 1926. What must be understood is he was a man who was in one of the most competitive periods of heavyweight boxing and stood out amongst the best in the sport. All the while, McCaffrey routinely fought men much larger, though like the majority from this period, the sense of glory would leave no stone unturned regardless of the danger. Speedy, quick, skillful, and with a punch, McCaffrey left a legacy that pugilists from all walks can admire. And depending on who you ask, on that one fateful night in 1885, heavily outweighed and against all odds, defeated the man that would eventually become heavyweight champion of the world. Thanks for watching, and please share your thoughts in the comments.